Hello, everyone. Thank you again for tuning in to the Policing in America podcast. I'm your host, Sergeant Tom. It has been a while since we've been able to do an episode, and that is one of the downsides of being an active law enforcement personnel. The plus is that I get to stay contemporary and still keep my finger on the pulse of everything that's happening. The downside is we also are experiencing a police crisis in shortage of staffing. So I get called out to a lot of things, and I'm still heading out there fighting the good fight. So thanks for sticking with us. This is September, and September is National Suicide Prevention Awareness Month in law enforcement. So many around the country are taking on the daunting task of talking about suicide. We'll get into it more with our guests, but in general, many police officers don't realize we lose more to suicide than we do with the assassinations and with in-line of duty deaths. So if we're going to worry about one, we must absolutely worry about the other. And with that, we have a very special guest and a friend of mine. I'm going to do a quick introduction. So today on the podcast, we have Dr. Michelle Gundy. Michelle Gundy is a researcher, consultant, a U.S. Army veteran, and a subject matter expert in the fields of communication, trauma, and policing. Dr. Gundy has 20 years of professional experience in leadership and communications. Her deep knowledge of the emotional, physical, neurobiological, and physiological effects of trauma and how it relates to the field of policing has allowed her to work closely with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Citizens Review Board. Dr. Gundy is also a member of the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. She stays on top of the latest trends and research. She educates officers all over, and we're hoping she's going to educate us today. Dr. Gundy, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you, Tom. I'm honored to be here.
Awesome. So what I was hoping we could do is tap into your expertise. Can we open with trauma-informed care? Is that a good place to start?
Absolutely. Yeah, we can start with that. And I thought maybe we could debunk some sort of common myths about trauma, especially those that come up, regularly in the field of policing. So yeah, let's dive right in.
Okay. And so oftentimes for the listeners, we as police officers have an idea of this trauma-informed care on
Yes.
how we interact with the public.
Correct.
But for this episode, we're going to largely focus in-house, and we're going to talk with the perspective of ourselves. So how would you explain trauma-informed care, but using the police officer as your subject?
Absolutely. So you're talking self-care?
Correct.
You got it. It's so important. I think one of the biggest myths when it comes to trauma is that trauma is just emotions and that we can sort of control them. The biggest joke in history is the phrase, control your emotions. Because if we could control our emotions, we would all just be happy all the time. So obviously that's just not something that we're capable of doing. And trauma is so much more than just your emotions. It's your limbic system. It affects all systems in the body, the endocrine system, your gastrointestinal system, your limbic system, your neurological system, your biological, you name it. Your emotions are not something that you can control. You can control your behaviors and your reactions to those emotions, but you're going to feel the emotions, negative or positive, whether you want to or not. And when we ignore, especially negative emotions related to trauma, what it does is it wreaks havoc in our body. So when the limbic system kicks in, it releases cortisol, adrenaline, and epinephrine. And those stress chemicals can be incredibly damaging to the body. And over time, what they can do is cause chronic illness, heart disease, hypertension, gastrointestinal disorders, you name it. So ignoring your emotions and thinking that you are strong enough to overcome those emotions or to ignore them or to compartmentalize them, all you're doing is allowing them to run rampant within your body. And as those stress hormones kick in and increase over time, this is why we see so many police officers dying young of heart attacks, of strokes, of stress-related illnesses or chronic disease, because they've ignored their emotional well-being for so long. So self-care is so important. And that can be as simple as going for walks to process your emotion, writing for 5 minutes a day to help process your emotions through your system, seeking mental health care, going to therapy, talking to a trusted loved one, being friends with people outside the profession. I know that cops love to be friends with cops because they think they're the only people who understand them, but that's simply not true. And when you only surround yourself with other police officers and you all refuse to acknowledge and discuss your emotions and the trauma of what you're going through, you're not doing you're just doing yourself a disservice. So if you really want to focus on self-care and focus on being better, things like healthy eating, healthy sleep habits. Studies show that when people don't sleep, all-cause mortality increases. We know that for a fact. You know that. So sleeping, mental health care, exercise, talking things out, journaling. These are just little steps that we can take to prevent our bodies from taking over and making us sick.
And from, for the listeners who aren't in law enforcement, if officers are taking care of this issue, the impacts of trauma, it's going to make them perform better at their duties. It's not just simply we're trying to make cops live longer or trying to make cops live healthy. Sure, that is an important goal for us. It's an important goal for everybody. But for the person who's maybe being critical, you want an officer that is taking care of that traumatic exposure because they're more likely to provide better service, make better decisions. Would you say that's also true?
Absolutely. Studies show that vicarious trauma is serious and it impacts officers, and an unwell helper can be more detrimental to the individual in need of help than beneficial. So if you can't put yourself in a place of empathy and compassion and you're trying to help someone that's in a traumatized state, all you're going to do is aggravate them and exacerbate the situation. So if you want to decompress a situation, you need to model the behavior that you want to see in the individual that you're trying to help. And that means remaining calm, being patient, being kind. I think we really underestimate the power of kindness. We are, as human beings, we are broken through relationship, and we only heal through relationship. So if you can't be kind to someone, you cannot help them, period.
Okay, so you mentioned a few things, and I'm going to try to pull the thread on this.
Sure.
The co-regulation, is it not the case, though, and maybe this will bleed into one of my next questions, about the culture in policing. It seems like the culture in policing is not one that embraces everything you're saying. In fact, it's a culture of stoicism and carry the burden and bury it. And then one that is a little bit more authoritarian.
Yes.
Would you mind kind of unraveling that for us a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So authoritarian policing is something that we wanted. We created the current system of policing that we have today. So police are not at fault for the training that they receive or the culture of their department or how things have been. Because as a society back in the 70s and the 60s through the 80s, we decided we wanted to be tough on crime and tough on drugs. And we wanted our police to have that authoritarian behavior and model. I know that, I live in Las Vegas, and I know that in the 70s, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, their concept, it was ask, tell, make. And that has really carried through. That is not the kind of policing that we want today as a society. And we've seen the ramifications of that, but it's not modern day police officers' fault that we created that. So it takes time and work. This is a massive battleship that we have to turn, and it doesn't happen overnight. And you're absolutely right. Taking on the burden and I work with veterans as well, and I am a veteran and my friends are veterans. So this is something I deal with a lot with them as well. Taking on the burden and saying, I'm the strong one. I'm here to protect others. So I will bottle this all in. You're doing a disservice to yourself and your family. If you're out helping the community for 20, 30 years, and then you retire and within 5 years you die of a massive heart attack, think of what that does to your family, to your children, to your wife who supported you through all those years, dealt with your trauma that you refused to acknowledge, but you still took out on them. You were irritable. You didn't sleep. You missed family events. You didn't want to make decisions when you came home. And then you die young. Who are you helping?
Yeah, we should pause for the listeners to understand that the health metrics on police officers, we're overrepresented, not just in suicide, but we're overrepresented in almost all Peter Attia talked about the four horsemen of death, your
Yes.
heart disease and your cancers and your diabetes and your cognitive ailments. We're overrepresented in all of those.
Yes. And that is, Tom, that is directly related to unaddressed trauma. That is years and decades of stress chemicals overrunning the body's systems until they simply can't take it anymore.
Okay, so what about, let me play devil's advocate. What about the people that say, hey, you took on this job, I don't have to worry about it, this is what you signed up for? How do you inform the public of this that might be a little apathetic or just ignorant, and not in a negative connotation, just they don't have the knowledge?
I know what you mean, and I see that a lot. As a police researcher, I hear it sometimes. Oh, how can you research the police? And it's like, dude, come on. We don't treat doctors and nurses this way. And they're in very similar professions where they are constantly dealing with vicarious and secondary trauma. They're overwhelmed. They're overstimulated. They don't sleep. They don't take care of themselves. But we have mounds of compassion for veterans, for doctors, for nurses. We don't have it for police. And it's because so many people are angry at the police. And I can see both sides of the coin. I understand why people are angry at the police, but you don't impact change through being aggressive and angry towards people. You impact change through empathy and compassion. You say, listen, I know you have a hard job. I honestly can't, the more I research the police, the more I realize I can't think of a more difficult job. It is the most difficult job on the planet. You want to talk about dealing with traumatized populations? Every person that the police come into contact with is outside of their window of tolerance. They are in that fight, flight, freeze state. Their prefrontal cortex is offline. And we don't teach police how to deal with those individuals. And then we get mad when they don't know how to deal with those individuals. So as a society, that's something that we need to work on too. If we expect the police to be compassionate to other people, we have to be compassionate to the police.
It's a great point. And I'm going to see if I could quote you on this.
Sure.
We're dealing with people who are outside their level of tolerance. Is that what you said?
Their window of tolerance. Yes.
Their window. What do you mean by that? Because it's a brilliant phrase.
Thank you. I did not come up with it. So being outside of your window of tolerance is when your prefrontal cortex is online. You are thinking from an intellectual capacity. You're able to make decisions. For people who have a trauma background, which is the vast majority of people in general, and probably 100% of people that police engage with, they are operating from an amygdala response. Your amygdala is what sets off your stress chemicals and what puts you into that fight, flight, freeze response. When your amygdala comes online, it takes over from your prefrontal cortex. You are not able to make intelligent decisions. So if someone can't comply, that makes perfect sense. They're not listening. They're not understanding. They're not able to comply with you. They're not able to engage in a reasonable manner. Their body is dumping adrenaline, cortisol, and epinephrine through their system. And it has told it's pushing energy to their arms and legs. It's telling that person, this is a threat. We need to run. We need to flee. If they can't, then the next option is to fight. And that when it can be either physically or verbally aggressive. And again, their voluntary decision-making during this time is gone. This is a person whose brain is offline. So if you run into an individual who is argumentative and nasty and mean and talking shit to you, that's not that person. That is their fight, flight, freeze response. So for an officer to then negatively engage with that person, become combative, argue with them, you're arguing with someone that's gone. So you're just doing a detriment to yourself and to them because you're letting your ego take over and you're getting worked up when they're not in a place where they're capable of making sound decisions. And that's the window of tolerance. And I can tell you that once police are already involved, that individual is already outside of that window of tolerance and they're already offline.
I'm going to use that as I explain this to officers, because it's really succinct and it just makes perfect sense. And it kind of flies in the face of the culture of command presence.
Yes. Which
that's what cops learn early on. I appreciate, I'm sure many listeners do, that it's not the fault of the cop. Now that's going to be hard for people to hear because we're not saying we're not absolving you. We should be better. And this is where the police leadership comes in. And I'm going to get to that with them. But should we be teaching this to officers in the academy?
Absolutely. The younger, the sooner they learn, the better. I can tell you, Tom, so I've been a trauma researcher now for probably going on a decade. And once you put on trauma-informed glasses, you never see the world the same. I can't tell you how many times someone really just pissed me off and I wanted to be so mad at them, but then you start deconstructing their behavior and you think, what would cause a person to exhibit those types of behaviors, rigid or chaos behaviors? And it's trauma. The answer is always trauma. And the more you deconstruct it, the more you realize this person is hurting. And the worse their behavior, the worse they're hurting. And the most traumatized individuals in our society are those in prisons. And study after study after study have proven them. And so, yes, the earlier we can teach cops to be trauma informed and teach them about trauma with civilians and trauma with themselves, the better it is for everyone.
Yeah. And I think you're now making a case for us to teach this in our school system as
Absolutely.
well.
Yes.
I mean, it's crazy that you have to study to have a driver's license, but you don't have to have any study material to be a parent.
Correct.
And if we were better as a society at explaining this,
yes,
we would all have a much richer understanding. And even citizens could take ownership in if they see a cop having an amygdala hijack.
yes,
They can come in and say, everybody relax. And, even a citizen could do this as opposed to just filming and trying to catch all the bad behavior, which is just, I mean, almost like throwing gas onto an already, train that's on fire.
Exactly.
At this point.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I understand the need, if citizens weren't filming, we wouldn't have known what happened to George Floyd. So while I understand, I agree with you that citizens also have a duty to intervene.
Yeah.
Filming, while sometimes necessary, is not enough. If you see an officer, you're in that amygdala hijack response, you're absolutely right. Step in, calm the situation down, diffuse the situation, get everyone's prefrontal cortex back online so everyone can make rational decisions and we're not all in a threat response, just responding with kind of against our will.
So, Michelle, can you help us understand how the brain is operating when an officer is, let's just say they're now just at the precipice or at the edge of contemplation of suicide? Like, what's happening up there that the instinct for self-preservation is starting to waver?
Yes. So over time, our brains adapt to our environments. And that can be in a positive way through neuroplasticity. You can learn new things. You can have a growth mindset, or it can be detrimental to ourselves. And that can be through depression. And that's one we know studies show time and time and time again that traumatized individuals suffer from depression, period. And yes, we would hope that our brain, kicks into self-preservation mode, but you have to understand that when someone is really seriously contemplating suicide, that is their brain in self-preservation mode, because they're saying the suffering is so intense and so great that this is my option out of it. So coping mechanisms and habits that the brain forms are great at surviving or getting through traumatic experiences, but they're not always the best for it can be counterintuitive. It's not always the best thing for us. Just like these individuals that get stuck in this fight or flight response when they're young, if they come from an abusive household, then they have to learn to run or fight. And that's great. It saves them. It's beneficial for their survival. As you get older and you become a fighter, it's detrimental. You're in jail. You're getting in trouble. You're hurting people. You're hurting yourself. And it's the same thing when it comes to suicide. Depression, we don't understand and we don't appreciate the depths of depression as it is today. As a society, we just don't have an understanding of it. And we think, oh, well, you should just exercise or go outside and stand in the sun or drink more water. That is not how depression works. It is changes in the brain that you can't overcome on your own. People can either need chemical help, through pharmacology, or they need mental health help. It's not something you can just bootstrap your way out of. And that mentality we really need to work on that, period.
We, as a society, maybe as a species, we tend to overestimate our abilities.
100%.
And whether this is like the Dunning-Kruger effect or any of these many ways to describe it. We overestimate our ability to cope, to think, to drive, right? So how are we going to convince officers that they're not the outlier, that in fact they are this person that is struggling, when their baseline of how would I say, Michelle, their baseline for stress has been raised so high that while a normal person would feel stressed and overwhelmed, this is their baseline. So they're fine with this, but their cortisol is always on and their adrenaline's always doing a little bit, and everything's just higher.
Yes.
How do we break that?
Honestly, I think what we're doing right now, it's communication, it's talking about it, and it's education. I did a ride along not too long ago, and we were just chatting about life stuff. And he was the officer that I was riding along with was telling me that we were doing a 10-hour shift, and he was going to get off, and then 2 hours later go to the jail and do a 6-hour shift there. And he does that multiple times a week. And it's because he had some new girlfriend and he was trying to make money. So he could, and I explained to him the correlation between lack of sleep and all-cause mortality. And his jaw hit the ground. And I was like, you've never heard that if you don't sleep, you can get chronically ill? He hadn't. So to us, things that can seem so basic and so common sense, they're really not basic, and they're not common sense. It's done through education. It's done through communication. It's done through conversations. Police leaders need to openly discuss mental health with their department, period. And FTOs, I had this still to this day still breaks my heart. In my first trauma-informed research study, I had an officer, she was new, on the department a couple years. Her FTO, for some reason, ingrained over and over and over in her psyche that seeking mental health care or talking to someone about problems on the job was a betrayal of the badge. And she had such significant signs of PTSD. And I had to keep that researcher relationship with her during our interactions because, you know how it is.
Sure.
But I thought about her every day. And when that research project was done, I reached back out to her and I said, I need you to understand how concerned I am for your well-being. How are you? She quit. She quit the force because she didn't think that she could see, the symptoms had completely overtaken her life. And she didn't think that she could see a therapist while still being a police officer. So that department invested 3 years into an officer only to lose them because the FTO was an asshole who didn't know what he was talking about. So that is what needs to change. If you're an officer and you have seen a therapist, if you've got, sought mental health care assistance, if you've been suicidal, talk about it with other officers. You don't just have to talk about beer and girls and the job. You can talk about things that are important to you because it can literally save the lives of another officer.
And interesting, Michelle, what is your take on the fact that there seems to be a very strong push to, in the interest of diversity, equity, and inclusion, many departments are trying to go all in with women, and they're trying very hard to bring women into the department.
Yes.
And it just seems like the systems in play are very male dominated. Even the uniforms we wear seem to be tailored towards men, and the systems in play. Do you see on the horizon even more problems with this because we're not even set up to deal with, maybe the female who's already has to navigate a male dominated, stoic environment?
Correct. I definitely see it as problematic, but to be honest, I'm seeing really great change. I just wrapped a research project where I talked to about 60 chiefs and sheriffs across the country. And a lot of them are much more, I don't want to say progressive because it's not political. It's progressive as far as evidence-based policies and procedures within the department. So they have lactation rooms for females. They're building female locker rooms, which makes perfect sense. They're allowing females to wear, to sort of adjust their uniforms so that they fit our female anatomy a little bit better. And yes, they are. We need more female police officers. Studies again show time and time again that female officers have less use of force, way less excessive use of force, less officer complaints. They're better at communication, de-escalation, empathy, compassion. We need more of that. It's the same with the military. And I think the military provided a pretty good blueprint for us. Was it rough in the first few years? Sure. Was there pushback from male soldiers? Absolutely. But now that, I was in the Army, now that it's integrated, you need some of those female perspectives. We need female perspectives everywhere. We need diversified perspectives in every profession and organization. And so, yes, is it going to be a struggle for women in the beginning? Yeah. In the next few years? Yes. But I don't want that to deter females from joining the force, because the bottom line, plain and simple, is we need more. We need more female officers.
That's very interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because most of the talks I have are with other men in regards to this. So I love hearing that. So when it comes to this, when it comes to the resistance of training, I think this is where I'm landing, just because I feel I want to get the show. So we're going to have these conversations, and hopefully people listen, and hopefully people share it. What about from a policy perspective? And let me give you an idea. When I first applied for the job 20 years ago, I was a little older. I was 31. Some people are mostly in their 20s, and they do these psychological evals. Most people haven't had a ton of psychological trauma at that phase of their life. You may have some, but certainly not the aggregate of what a police officer is going to see. And then they work 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the line. I'm 20 years in. I've had much more trauma that I've experienced, much more vicarious trauma that I've seen my partners go through. Not one psychological evaluation, even though I got to shoot my gun every month, not one follow-up with the psych evaluation to say, hey, your baseline is off or something. Do you see any movement in that area? Annual appointments at this point, or at least every 5 years?
I do. First of all, that's very troubling. If you've never had psychological evaluations, that's a huge, huge problem. And I understand there's a resistance, and it evolves around the fit for duty. No one ever wants to be declared unfit for duty. And I understand the importance and the value of that. However, like I said earlier, traumatized helpers aren't helpful. You're going to get stuck in that amygdala response as well, just as fast as the person that you're trying to engage with. So yes, I have seen Sheriff Kelvin Barrett of the Dane County in Wisconsin. He's an awesome sheriff. He is super focused on mental health, and that is in the community and within his department. And I know that one of the things he does is, and man, I hope I don't butcher this. It's been a few weeks since I spoke to him, but he has a mental health day every day, and every year, and it can be your birthday, or it can be a specific day. You're going to get that day off. All you have to do is go in and talk to a therapist and check in. And then from then, the rest of the day is yours. You can do what you want with it. But he's had really great success with that. People connect with that therapist. They can go back to talk to them again. And he's found that just by making it an annual, this is not a fit for duty evaluation. This is just a, hey, you have to go check in with this mental health care professional on this day, and then the rest of the day is yours. And he's had really great response with that. That is a policy that he has in place. I've seen similar within other departments where, it's mandatory, but it's not a fit for duty evaluation. And yes, that has really gone a long way. And also removing it outside the department. So I know, EAPs are great, and everyone wants to think that, officers will go, but I've heard stories of, there was one EAP center across from a sort of cafe or bar that officers hung out at. And if they would see an officer leaving EAP, they would literally mock them from across the street. You going to cry about your girlfriend? That's not helpful. And we understand that police are going to make fun of each other. I come from the military. We did the same. If someone expresses a vulnerability, the first thing we're going to do is make fun of them. So I get that. But it's time, as a culture and as a field, it's time to grow up and to understand that it's not always about being deemed fit for duty. Sometimes it's just, are you okay? What's going on in your life? Do you have an abundance of stressors? Are you going through a divorce? Are you having issues with your interpersonal relationships? Are you having mood swings? Are you not sleeping? Are you depressed? Do you not want to make decisions on your time off? These are components of trauma. And if you ignore them, your body will keep toll. And eventually you will have chronic illness and chronic disease, and things will only get worse. So it's time to grow up, and it's time for the field of policing to really have a come to Jesus moment.
It's well said. It seems as though, and I'm speculating, officers tend to be problem solvers. They show up to a call, they're trying to de-escalate, they're trying to keep the peace, they're trying to figure things out. So they learn this skill, I guess, of problem solving and taking and doing it on their own. Even calling a sergeant to a scene is sort of only when we absolutely have to. So that's almost like a sense of pride. Do you think that bleeds over into their personal life? Has your research shown that just as a personality type, an officer tends to be one that doesn't want help, wants to solve the problem because of the stigma or the personality, the identity that they've created?
Absolutely. And you said it perfectly. It's pride. It's pride and it's ego. I see it in military and I see it in police officers. It's the sort of superhero complex. I'm here to save the world. I don't need help. And that is, not only is it not beneficial to the officer, but it's really not beneficial to anyone that you're trying to help. And it's definitely not beneficial to your family, because then you go home and you're upset and, you're not easy to get along with, and your family can become scared of you, or they feel like they're walking on eggshells around you. So yes, absolutely. There is something to do. There is a connection between the type of personality that brings in police officers. They want to help, but then they take it on themselves. Well, only I can do this. And that's called a rigid response. And that is a rigid response to trauma. I'm the only one that can do this. I don't want to. And, a lot of it, Tom, is I don't want to burden. That's where a lot of suicide happens. I don't want to be a burden on others. I don't want to unload myself on others. I can't tell my wife that I just saw a dead baby because she can't handle it. So I'll keep it in because I'm the only one strong enough to deal with it. And that is what kills not only police officers, but veterans, doctors, nurses, care providers, because that's just not the case. There are so many people that can understand you, that can empathize with you, and that can help you. You're not a burden. You're never a burden. Asking for help doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you a burden. It makes you courageous.
Thank you for saying it like that, Michelle. And it's also when people say like the courageous conversation.
Yeah.
Sometimes how would you recommend an officer approach another officer? And one of these, superhero types that just gets it done, but their partner sees what's happening and they could already see the nudging of this person going. What would you recommend? How do they, maybe some phrases or some ways to open that door to start having that conversation before it gets too far?
Absolutely. So the easiest thing you can do is say, hey, are you okay? It's such an easy icebreaker and way to open the door. And I can tell you that they're probably going to respond with, yeah, I'm fine. And then from there, you state what you're seeing. Hey man, I don't know about that. You seem really irritable. And it seems like, you and your wife are struggling, and, you're having a lot of issues. You've been a little excessive, with some of the people that we've engaged with lately. What's going on? Or maybe, you notice that their drinking has suddenly increased. We know that cops like to drink, and that is a coping mechanism. And it's very, very, very understandable, but it's a maladaptive coping mechanism. And we need to understand that. If you feel that you need drinks after your shift to deal with what you just went through, then that is a trauma response. And that is something you can approach your partner or another officer with. Hey man, I noticed that you're drinking a lot more. What's going on? And if they don't want to talk to you or they're not ready, that's okay. That's not where the conversation ends. Then you go to someone else, whether it's a mental health provider, someone at a EAP, a supervisor, and it's as simple as, hey, I'm concerned about Jim. I'm seeing these symptoms. He's drinking. He's irritable. He's having problems with his personal life. I'm concerned. That's it. And then let the professionals take it from there. Just initiate the conversation in any way that you can. And it's also okay to tell people, hey man, it's okay to not be okay.
Those phrases, even though I'm educated on it, I still, they hit me with, It's not as appealing to me. I wish there was a way to say it that doesn't sort of imply that I can't handle it. But I've yet to come up with the words that string together, that at the end of the day, it is help and you need
Yes.
help,
Yeah.
right? If you break your leg, you need help. There's no way to say like walk it off,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So
Yes.
it's just, you just have to accept it just for the audience and for some of the terminology. What is EAP?
Employee assistance programs.
Okay, employee assistance program. When you say maladaptive, what does that mean?
Maladaptive means like negative. So
Okay.
a coping mechanism that helps your stress. Drinking, let's say drinking. You drink because you feel so overstimulated and stressed. So you drink to calm that stress, but that's obviously not a healthy coping mechanism. A healthy coping mechanism for stress would be exercise or running it off or talking to someone. A maladaptive coping mechanism would be drinking or smoking or overeating or gambling or, any of those sort of, negative behaviors.
Now, we are entering a pretty unique era in policing, and not every agency is experiencing this, but a lot of them are. We are now at some critical shortages of policing.
Yes.
We can't get enough people to apply. And then when they do, we're having trouble retaining them.
Yes.
Okay, so that means those of us that are kind of, sticking it out are now taking on more of a burden of this.
Exactly.
And I'm sure a lot of the listeners are experiencing this as well.
Yes.
I would ask this. A lot of the young officers hear from the existing officers, get out, this career sucks, get out while you can.
Yeah.
What would you say to those officers that are staying here, but then telling everybody else how negative, and maybe that negative feedback loop is not doing them any favors either?
You nailed it. Exactly. It's not doing anyone any favors to do that. Every department that I've talked to, like I said, I spoke to, I think 60 sheriffs and chiefs. One of them was not in a recruitment and retention crisis. It is nationwide, and it's dual prong. First, it's a hard job. And during 2020, 2021, we had the mass resignation where officers retired and we couldn't get any new officers in. So first, it's just that everyone left, no one signed up, but also it's the media. The media has really, really, really hurt policing, and public perception of policing is at an all-time low. So not only do we have so many officers leaving, but it's like, well, who the hell wants to be a cop right now when you're one of the most hated professions on the planet? So as citizens, and it's one job that I take incredibly seriously, we have to educate the public. These are not bad people. These are not bad human beings. This is the policing culture that we demanded over the last few decades. And now we understand this is not the way that we need to do things going forward. Our community expects more, but you have to retrain the police to do that. You don't do that by defunding the police, certainly, because if you take away their money, then how are they supposed to retrain? How are they supposed to recruit new individuals? How are they supposed to have significant academies? If we want well-trained police, you can't have a month-long academy. You can't be, you have to go to school for 2 years to be a barber. So we need longer academies for police. So for those officers that are sort of in that negative space, I understand and I get it, but you can't shit on new officers that come in. You can't tell them how much the job sucks because they're going to leave, and then you're going to be working more overtime. You're going to be working more shifts. Your 911 and 311 call wait times are going to increase, and that's going to piss people off even more. So then you arrive on the scene, someone's been waiting for a 911 call for 40 minutes. They're furious with you. So you've just made your job a little bit more difficult. Hang in there. Hang in there. Help is coming. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing hope. I'm seeing inspiration in these departments that I'm talking to, these chiefs and these sheriffs. They're doing the best that they can. They're changing the recruitment model, which is in desperate need. That paramilitary recruitment model that we've been using for decades, it doesn't work anymore. Female officers don't want to join the force to hop walls and chase down bad guys and get in fistfights. These are mothers. These are women. They want to understand and know that their communication skills are so valued and so important right now. So we have to change our recruiting tactics. We have to show that our forces are diversified. Women are welcome. People of color are welcome, and they're encouraged to apply. And this is I don't want to say a kinder, gentler police force, but a more compassionate police force that's more aimed at peace officer than police officer. That's the future of policing.
Yeah. And it seems like that is, again, an ego shot that comes in when cops hate the phrase kinder and gentler. Oh,
Yes, they do.
and they now call that hug a thug or some witty little quip that they come up with. But if they only understood that the 17-year-old gangster has had most likely a very shitty go of it.
Yes.
And this is why they are the asshole gangster. It's rare the kid in the suburbs that has both parents pushing them and giving them extracurricular activities becomes the inner city gangster.
Correct.
And if you could just open their minds a little bit with that empathy and that compassion, you could be the person who says the kindest thing to this individual that they've ever heard.
Yes.
And is that a powerful thing, Michelle, to get some kindness when you've had nothing but trauma your life?
Absolutely, Tom. I think one of the most important things for police to understand, there's two things. First and most important is the brain is just as different from individual to individual as our fingerprints. No two human brains form the same. And human brains that are developed under adverse conditions, so trauma and neglect and abuse, they develop differently than brains that are developed under healthy, safe, stable conditions. So, and intergeneration, we now understand so in the 1990s, let me back up a little bit here. In the 1990s, two very important things happened. And that was the ACEs study, which is the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And our ability to know and understand the human brain really took a massive jump forward. So now we really understand the role of trauma on the developing brain and just how askew it can send things. So, and along with that is attachment theory, which I'm really thrilled is coming into the conversation more and more now, because in our early years, so 0 through 3, the way that we attach to our caregiver is the blueprint for all interpersonal relationships throughout the rest of our life. So if you are as infants, we are biologically wired to demand care, love, nutrition, emotional, response from our caregiver, whether it can be a parent, a grandparent. It doesn't have to be a biological parent, but that's the person that is our assigned caregiver. And if our needs aren't met, if we cry and our cries go ignored, or if we don't receive, attention or love or caring, being held, physical attention and physical touch is very important in those early years. We can develop either a disorganized or an anxious or an avoidant attachment style. And that will carry through for the rest of our lives until we're healed through relationship. And it's difficult. So that's typically with the mental health professional. But so exactly like you said, an individual that's raised in the suburbs, loving, caring parents, very attentive parents, 2 parents in the home, no one is mentally ill or suffering from substance use disorder. There's no food scarcity. We always have a home. That individual's brain develops in a healthy environment, and they are then, capable for all sorts of success. Individuals who aren't raised in that. So we're talking 0 through 3, an infant who doesn't get their needs met is already neurologically at a massive disadvantage. So you're absolutely right. That 17-year-old quote unquote thug that's joined a gang, that's selling drugs, they're not doing that because it's a bad kid, because that's the life they want to live. They don't know any better. Their brain is so desperate for community and for love and for care that they're not going to get at home, that they'll join a gang because, hey, these people care about me. They're nice to me. They protect me. They're not making that decision with their prefrontal cortex. They're making that decision in a fight or flight response. They're in survival mode for their entire lives. And like I said earlier, we are broken through relationship. We can only be healed through relationship. So I need officers to really understand the power that they have with kindness, just being kind to someone. People like that who are severely traumatized, there's a very great chance that they've never had a kind, safe, healthy relationship in their entire life. So think about what that must feel like to never have a parent that loves you and cares for you, never have grandparents that tell you they love you, that feed you, that take care of you. And then you're just pushed out into the world as an adolescent, and you're scared and you're traumatized and you don't know any better. Think about the power of an authoritative figure like a police officer saying, hey, it's okay. I'm here to help you. And just being nice. You can literally affect the trajectory of that person's entire life with a few kind words.
So it resonates with me, especially for someone that grew up, 17-year-old mother. I don't know my father. There were food insecurities and all the rest. And I look at this and I think the cognitive journey I've had to travel to get myself to this balanced state. And I asked a young officer yesterday, I asked a class of young officers, why are you here? And, the class is quiet because nobody wants to say anything. And one kid raises his hand and he says, I want to chase gangsters and put them in jail. It's okay. So I probe a little bit more. Why? What about this? Well, because these are bullies and I want to protect the community. Okay, so there's a little bit of altruism in there. It's not just because it's exciting or cool, but how do you get the 22-year-old who is just brimming with testosterone, who the department brought in, and they said, you're what we're looking for, right? So he said this in his interview. He talked about how he wants to chase criminals and lock them up. And the department has reinforced that mentality. And now he's working in a division because it's a busy division. So there are gangsters and he's chasing them. And this is just being reinforced. How do you tell that officer, hey, this kid hasn't, let me just be, inarticulate. This kid hasn't been hugged enough. And he needs our compassion, not our authority. How do you even begin to have that conversation with a young cop like that?
Well, the good thing is millennials and Gen Z are much more receptive to mental health. It has become part of our culture. I grew up a little bit with it. It didn't really start becoming popular or pop culture until I was, probably in the last 10 years or so. But Gen Z, especially the real young generation, they've grown up with it. They understand that mental health is important. They understand that you have to be compassionate. I mean, look at the youth. Look how progressive they are. They're fighting for civil rights. They're fighting for LGBTQ rights. They understand that these are people too, and that they deserve equality. They deserve love. They deserve compassion, just like the rest of us. So they are more receptive to it. And that's one of the things that the chiefs and sheriffs that I've talked to have said, that like this younger generation sort of gets it, but they're also products of their environment. So exactly like you said, if they get an FTO that's just a raging asshole, that's like, well, if I tell this person to do something, they don't do it, then I'm going to slam their head on the hood of my car. And that's just how it's going to be, because that's how you solve crime. Then first of all, that FTO either needs to go or needs to not be an FTO anymore. And it's really about the culture of the department. And that comes from leadership. That comes from the sheriff. That comes from the command staff. You have to have a culture of understanding, a culture of compassion, and a trauma-informed culture. And what I'm seeing a lot more of is that these command staff, they're going back to school. They're getting their master's degrees in leadership. And they understand now that culture is what changes a department. It's not just the academy. You can't just train the new staff. You got to get everyone on board. And that really comes through modeling that behavior that you want to see within the department. So if you're a sheriff, if you're a chief, learn about this stuff. Learn trauma science. You don't have to get into the weeds. You don't have to get into the neurobiology. Learn a little bit about human development and about how the brain develops. There are trauma-informed trainers out there. There's trauma-informed courses. It's not that difficult. And I'm telling you, once that lens kind of kicks on, and once you put those trauma-informed glasses on, you never see things the same again, because you understand the responses that you're seeing with citizens that were previously scary and confusing and could easily be, considered a threat. But when you understand human behavior, you're like, this is a terrified individual. And if you address a terrified individual with aggression, you're going to scare them even more. You're not going to help them. You're not going to help yourself. You're going to get into a use of force. You're going to go hands-on versus taking a step back, calming the situation down, get their prefrontal cortex back online. And there are easy steps to take. Being kind to them, saying, hey, let's calm down. I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you. Sometimes you have to say it a few times. Turn off your radio, tell your partner to be quiet, get to a quieter location. If you can walk, off the sidewalk, maybe into an alley or something like that, get them away from crowds, and just give them that individual time to decompress for a few minutes, you can kick their brain back online. Be as predictable as possible. Because when someone is in a fight or flight response and all they see is here's a cop, they're going to get me, they're terrified. So if you can be calm, if you can model the behavior you want to see in them, and if you can decompress the situation by repeating yourself multiple times, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you. I'm not going to hurt you. And then if you get a chance, many of these traumatized people have never been in a relationship that's given them an opportunity to reflect on their own behavior. Saying things like, hey, when you yell and scream and threaten people, it scares them. So that's why I'm here. I'm here to help you. I'm not going to take you to jail. I want to talk to you. Let's calm down. Those simple steps can turn that person from, a crazed fight or flight response into an individual that you can actually engage with.
Michelle, I've often said, we talk a lot about officer safety. And
Yes.
when officers say, I'm not going to put my safety in jeopardy, and they keep the gun out, I will tell them the safest person you could have in front of you is somebody who trusts you.
Yes.
Because if this person with the knife trusts me, they are exponentially, statistically, right, quantifiably less likely to plunge that knife into the person that they trust.
Yes.
And officers need to understand the consistency with them pointing a gun at somebody and then saying, it's okay, it's okay. Like, we have to break this idea. I have to trust you. If you're my partner, you have lethal force. I'm going to holster and I'm going to talk to this person, without the threat of deadly force right in front of them. We rely too much on that.
Yes.
And you could still have a deadly force option available. But the goal is to get them into custody with as little trauma, abuse from, we are an entity of the government, right? The governmental interests, like we're now hearing these terms that are out there. So, okay, let me ask you this. What is something these officers can read? Is there a book you'd recommend, or is there an article or something that we could at least start bridging the gap?
That's a great question.
I heard of a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that?
I am. The Body Keeps the Score is a good one. And anything by Dr. Gabor Mate.
Can you spell that for everybody?
Absolutely. It's Dr. Gabor, and his last name is Mate. He also has a documentary. It's called The Wisdom of Trauma. And I recommend that to chiefs and sheriffs all the time. Show this to your department. You can't watch that and not feel empathy and compassion for the worst of the worst, individuals that we have to engage with, the most, addicted, the most abused, the most traumatized. That's a fantastic one. The Body Keeps the Score is another one. Connecting Paradigms is a great one. It's a little in the weeds. It's a lot about neurobiology, but it's fantastic if you really want that deeper sort of look. I hear ever since I started researching cops, I've heard over and over and over again from cops. Cops are dumb. You have to dumb things down. We're knuckle draggers. And I'm telling you now, that's absolute bullshit. I don't buy into that anymore. I was told for a long time, you have to dumb things down when you talk to police. That's just absolutely not the case. So I don't recommend, middle school books to cops because I know that they're smarter than that and they're curious and they want to learn more. So read anything by Dr. Gabor Mate. One of his books is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. That is a fantastic book about trauma and addiction. Watch his movie and literally just Google trauma science. And there's a website called ACEs Too High. ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. And you can learn not only about ACEs in the public, but ACEs within yourself. You can take a test and you can get your own ACE score. And that is crucial for establishing your baseline. Many officers don't even know that they're operating with a baseline trauma score from childhood of 6 or 7, which is considered highly traumatized. And then you go into a profession like policing, which is one of the most traumatic professions out there, and you're dealing with more and more vicarious trauma every day. And you end up in a permanent fight or flight response that you just can't get out of. And that is where the chronic illness and the disease and the suicide and the depression come into play.
Thank you for that. Now, as we start to wrap up, I want to be cognizant of your time. Do you have any suggestions that officers can use today? They go end of watch and they're in their car and they're in this fight or flight state. They're in this heightened state of awareness. Are there things they can do? They can't get to the gym, say, but are there 5-minute meditations, grateful journals, the gratuity journal, anything like that that they can do today that are just small little interventions that can start nudging them into a healthy baseline?
Absolutely. The first one, and we hear this all the time, but I for some reason, people think it's bullshit, but breathing, taking deep breaths literally brings your prefrontal cortex back online. You're engaging your other senses, smelling something. So if you can keep something that smells good to you, maybe, something with your wife's perfume sprayed on it or a candle, anything like that. If you're in a hyper aroused state and you take some smells of something, it literally brings your prefrontal cortex back online. Deep breathing, box breathing, breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, breathe out for 4, hold it for 4. That is something you can do in your squad car for 2 minutes after a traumatic call or a call where you're all, wound up, you just went hands on, whatever it is. Sit down for 2 minutes, take some deep breaths, journaling. And it doesn't have to be a gratitude journal, because I know a lot of cops are like, that's stupid, I'm not going to do that. That's fine.
Right.
You don't even have to call it a journal. Get a notepad and for 2 minutes a day, just write anything in your thoughts. It seems silly, but that is how we process emotions. We process our emotions through speech and through writing. So if you can just if you don't want to talk to someone, then you can spend 2 minutes, just write down what happened. And I guarantee you will feel better. You will sleep better at night because those emotions won't keep you up. And just a quick thing, if you're in a cortisol response, so you can feel your adrenaline pumping and your epinephrine pumping, do a quick jog. Jogging, whether it's a jog around if you can't go to the gym, do push-ups, do a minute of push-ups, do some jumping jacks, go for a quick, it seems silly, but that's how you get those stress chemicals processed through your body so that you're not just in that freeze response. Because if you can't process those chemicals, then you get stuck in freeze. And that's when things get really, really dangerous. You get those feelings of helplessness, those feelings of loss of control. And that's where PTSD sets in.
It's wonderful. Thank you. These are little action items that they can do. And they don't even have to think about anything. They don't have to meditate, hit the watch, double click it, get your stopwatch and just breathe. Yes. If nothing else, just take in the air, bring out the air, just get everything back online.
Exactly.
And I think, like you say, conversations like this hopefully start to move the needle. I heard from Jay Shetty recently on one of his podcasts, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at begin to change.
Yes.
So if we can ask our officers to listen to people like yourself that are spending all your time and energy and effort to help us, like start looking at it differently, and maybe you'll see it differently. It's not a stigma. You're not weak.
No.
This is a righteous endeavor to take care of yourself.
It is. And it's courageous. It is the courageous act to ask for assistance or to say, I'm not okay. You can even just say, I'm struggling right now. That's it. You don't have to say, I need help. You don't have to say, I'm worried. I'm going through a lot right now. Break that ice, have those conversations, get the awareness out there. And you're absolutely right, Tom. Keep an open mind.
That's awesome. Dr. Michelle Gundy, I want to thank you for spending time with us on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I look forward to doing some more work with you, and maybe we could do a follow-up. Maybe we can do an episode where we just start giving people action items, or even if it's like a breathworks drill or just something like that they can just upload, and they could download the podcast rather and just go through some of this meditations or thoughts, something creative.
Absolutely. And if your listeners have questions and they want to write, if they can write into you, then I would be happy to answer those questions. We can talk about trauma, whatever they feel is important to them in their line of work. Absolutely. I would love that. And
the listeners, you have the address, and it's also on the pod page as well. So that's it for now. Dr. Gundy, we will see you on the next one. Okay. Thank you so much.
Sounds good. Thank you.